guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, 5 more tips to make your woodworking a little more enjoyable. Well, a couple of weeks ago on the show, I brought you my first ever here on the channel tips video for woodworking. And it was met with such positive response that I thought that I would do another one because I did have a few more tips that I wanted to share with you. So that's what we're going to do on today's show. We're going to focus on another 5 of those little woodworking tips that you pick up along the way to make your woodworking experience just that much better. So let's head over to the bench for the first one. Well, the first thing I want to talk about today is sandpaper. And we all have it, we all use it. There are different grades, different qualities, there are different backing papers, all kinds of stuff that's involved. But what happens is sometimes with these sandpapers, the paper that they are placed on is kind of thin. And as you're working with it, it tends to tear or break, and it's really not that strong, and it can be quite frustrating. But yet the cloth-backed sandpapers are very expensive. So this is what you can do to kind of make your own and get more life out of your sandpaper. And all it takes is a little bit of duct tape. So it's as simple and easy as taking some duct tape. In this case, it's Gorilla Tape for me. This is all I had in the shop. And laying the duct tape on the back of your sandpaper and rubbing it down. And you will do this across the entire back of your sandpaper. There we go. Now I'm not going to waste another piece of duct tape here just for the demonstration. So what you want to do at this point is just trim off the excess duct tape off of your sandpaper piece. And as well here, just to keep everything all neat and tidy, I'm going to trim off this excess sandpaper here at the edge of our duct tape. So now by doing this, what you have done is you have created a rather thick piece of sandpaper, and yet it's still perfectly pliable to get in there and work on your projects. But you have considerably strengthened its backing material and made this so that it's going to last a lot longer. I would venture to say that the grit itself is going to wear off and wear out before you're ever going to tear through that the duct tape on the back of it. So there you go. To make your own shop-made, stronger, more durable sandpapers, coat the back with a little bit of duct tape. Well, for the second tip of the day, every once in a while in the shop I need to mix up some epoxy, or sometimes I have to mix up some wood filler because it is separated or that sort of thing. And normally I have scrap pieces of plexiglass here that I use as almost a palette, and once the stuff is dry I scrape it off and that sort of thing. But there's sometimes that this becomes a little much, like you don't want to necessarily waste the plexi, or what if you don't have plexi? Well, the most simple solution and the easiest way to mix things up in your shop, especially things like 2-part epoxy, is to make yourself a little palette. And all you need for that is a little bit of painter's tape. In this case, it is 1.5 wide painter's tape. You just need a few pieces. So what you can do is right here on the masking tape, you can mix up your epoxy or your wood filler or whatever it is that you're mixing up right here on the masking tape, right on top of your bench. The masking tape is going to protect your bench and make it so that you're not getting the stuff everywhere. And once you're done working with it, you just peel up the masking tape, fold it over on itself, and toss it in the trash. That's it. I mean, an instant pallet, your bench is perfectly clean. There's no mess, there's no screwing around, and you don't have a piece of plexi that you need to clean up later, as what I would do, or you don't have, say, a plastic dish that you mixed it in that now goes into the landfill. You just have a little piece of masking tape. So there you go, mixing epoxy or wood filler on your bench using a little bit of 1.5" painter's tape. Well, my next tip involves glue ups and glue spreading. And sometimes you need a glue spreader. Let's say when you're doing an end grain cutting board, there's a rather large surface there of wood that needs to have glue applied to it. And sometimes if you use a brush or that sort of thing, you're not really getting a good even coating. So I'm going to show you a way to make a very quick disposable glue spreader. And what I have here is a very thin piece of cardboard. It's about the size of a business card. And I also have a pair of these. Now, don't tell my wife, but I stole them out of her sewing kit. And what these are pinking shears. And if you don't know what pinking shears are, they are a pair of scissors that cuts a jagged line in material, and it's usually meant to cut this line to prevent material from fraying. But you can see there what kind of an edge it has cut. So now by using this as a spreader, let me just show you what it does. So just for the purposes of this demonstration, I have a scrap of 1/2" plywood here, and I have it on some wax paper just to prevent making a mess here on the bench. So by putting a little bit of glue on here and using the serrated edge that you made by using the pinking shears, we have made it almost like, or I would say exactly like, a tile adhesive spreader, in that it's allowing a very specific size groove of glue to be left behind after your scraper goes over top. And by doing this, we're getting a very even coating, because as the two boards come together, it will meld that all into one, and you will know that you have an extremely even coat of glue across your entire surface. There you go, just like that. And when you're done, of course, this is disposable. If you have a wood stove, throw it in the wood stove and burn it up, or throw it in the garbage, or put it off to the side, scrape off the excess glue, cut that part off afterwards, and use the pinking shears to give yourself a new edge. So you can reuse it if you want. So there you go. With a little piece of cardboard and some pinking shears, you make yourself one heck of a great glue spreader to give yourself even coating of wood glue on your projects. Well, for my next tip here in the shop today, I've screwed together 2 pieces of wood. I've just got this one little square of walnut screwed onto a scrap piece of plywood. And what its purpose is to illustrate to you about the screw here. Now, sometimes when you're using screws as fasteners, you will use countersunk screws and they will sit flush to your piece. And for some pieces, that is just fine. But if you don't want that screw head to show, you need to counterbore it and then plug this hole. Now, a lot of people will just get dowels and fill that hole, cut them flush, sand it, etc. The problem is that that dowel is cut on the end grain. So when you insert it in here and glue it in, and if you apply a finish, it is going to go much darker than what this surrounding area is here, and it's going to look like a total eyesore. So to alleviate that, what you need, or what you can do, is you can use a set of these. And what these are plug cutters. And they enable you to cut a wood plug from the same species of wood. But as well, what they do is they don't cut on the end grain where it will be darker, they cut right on the surface. So you get the same reaction to the finish as what you're going to get outside of the plug area. So let's head over to the drill press and I'll show you what to do with this plug cutter. Well, the counter bore in my mock project is a 3/8 diameter hole. So I have the 3/8 diameter plug cutter installed in the drill press. And we have the same species of wood here. We're going to use the stop block in the fence just to help us hold it. And you want to drill basically a hole here, but you don't want to go right through. And what you end up with is a bunch of plugs cut out of a piece of wood that is the same stock as what you have your counter bore drilled into. So normally if I was going to be making plugs, I would have a larger board and drill many of these in the board and then run this through the bandsaw, resawing it to allow all of these plugs to pop out. But for the demonstration here today, I'm going to cheat a little and we're just going to place a screwdriver in here and you can just give it a little crack just like that, and that should pop your plug out. There you go. Now resawing it is the better way to go because you get a flat end here. But what you want to do now is you can now glue this plug into place. So I'm going to glue it in and tap it into place and show you how it's going to look. Now you can spend as much time as you please with different plugs trying to match up grain and that sort of thing. The more attention to the detail of the grain that you spend, the better off or the better your plug is going to be and the more hidden your joint is going to be. So let's get this one glued in and I'll show you what to do with it after it's glued in. All right, and we'll clean up the squeeze out on that and let it dry. And once your plug is dry, you can use a flush cut saw and we will just cut this plug, as the name of the saw implies, flush with our stock. And then we'll give it a sanding and I'll show you what we end up with. Now, I did not spend a lot of time lining up grains and that sort of thing, but if I had a large assortment of plugs, I could do that. You can see the circle here where that plug is, but I'm telling you, it's not going to stick out as much as if you were to use a dowel. And to illustrate that, I'm just going to put a little bit of rubbing alcohol on here to simulate a finish. And hopefully you can see there how by using plugs from the same piece of wood or from the same species and paying attention to grain and that sort of thing, it can go a long way to hiding your screw holes and making them blend into your project a lot better. And while the results I have here are not perfect, I could have made them a lot better than this just by taking some more time and lining up the plug. And my finishes dry. I wish all finishes dried that quickly, but they don't. Either way, there you go. The solution to hiding your screws. Get yourself some plug cutting bits, guys, and cut your own plugs from the same species instead of using dowels. And for the final tip of today's show, it involves the table saw. And there's always a time, it seems, when we need to rip thin strips of stock. The most common one that I can think of is splines in a frame. So what we need to do, or what I'm going to show you, is how to make a very quick thin strip cutting jig for when you need multiple strips and you need them in a hurry. So what I have done is I have taken a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and I have cut it so that it is tight in my miter slot and just slightly below the surface of the table. This will be the runner for our jig. I also have a scrap piece of 1/2 inch ply and this is roughly 5 inches by 7. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount our 1/2 inch plywood to our 3/4 inch plywood runner, and we will mount it in such a way so that it overhangs where our blade is, because we want to trim it off afterwards. So I'm going to get this glued together and I'll show you what we end up with. So I have countersunk and glued this in 3 number 8 by 3/4 inch screws, and it just fits here in this miter slot, just like that, and it slides there quite nicely. So at this point now, what we want to do is raise the blade and run it through one pass in order to cut the end off flush with the kerf of our blade. So at this point, you now want to cut your jig a little shorter. You need to decide at this point how wide your strips need to be. I said for splines, so let's do it for that. Let's do it for 1/8 inch thick splines. So for that, what I'm going to do, you know what, let's go even smaller. Let's go 1/16 of an inch. Even though the splines are rarely that thin, I'll show you how you can do for 1/16 inch. So the first thing you want to do is take a measurement of how wide this board is. In my case, it's 6 9/16, and then using your fence, you want to cut 1/16 of an inch off of it. So with that 1/16 cut off this edge, this becomes a setup jig now, where you place it in your miter slot, and what you want to do is place your stock that you want to cut up against your setup jig, move your fence in until it touches, lock it down, and then once that's done, you can remove your jig and follow through with the cut. And there we have our stock. That is 1/16 of an inch thick. So this is very repeatable in that all you need to do in order to cut your next strip is lay your jig in place, place the stock that you want to cut. You can see the gap here in between. The gap is the distance that the kerf makes plus our 1/16. That's why there's a gap there. Move your stock over, shift your fence, lock it down, remove your jig, and then follow through with the cut. And again, we're at 1/16 of an inch. So as you can see, very repeatable. There will be some variances there in the thickness, but for the most part, a jig like this will allow you to cut thin stock repeatedly and accurately with quick setup. You can make several of these, marking each one with the distance. I'll mark this one for 1/16 for future table saw setups. Make them out of scrap wood, put them off to the side somewhere, hang them on the wall, and every time you need thin stock for whatever, for model building or for splines, you've got the jig with the thickness that you need. So there you go. There's the last tip of the day for cutting thin stock. And there you have it. 5 more tips or tricks from the shop to make your day a little easier out here. For those of you with lots of experience, some of this stuff may be old hat and you may think it's kind of hokey. But for the newcomer to woodworking and to this craft that we all love, these tips are absolutely priceless. The cutting thin strips thing, I know I've showed on different shows before where you can use a combination square in order to hold it against that miter slot and do exactly what I've done by making this jig. The big difference here is a combination square allows for human error. The way that it does that is if you allow that fence to push the combination square out of alignment, or away from the edge of the miter slot, you have now cut the wrong size thin strip. The beauty about the jig is it can't go anywhere. It is glued and screwed and it is stuck in that miter slot. It is not moving. So setting your fence is quick, easy, takes the human error element out of it and allows you to cut those thin strips. The plug cutters. Not everyone knows what a plug cutter is, guys. So this, again, may be old hat to you, or it may be something that is completely new and you just can't wait to add it to your birthday or Christmas wish list. Now, the thing with the glue spreader and the pinking shears. One warning that I will give you here is it may be dangerous to your health to do that project. And it has nothing to do with the glue or the spreader, but if you wreck your wife's pinking shears, yeah, we all know how that's going to work out. So be very careful and make sure that you get their permission. Yeah, I got permission. We're going to go with that. So, man, I got to remember she watches the show. You guys, honestly, 5 more tips for you this week. A load of fun, and I hope you're going to try them out because they're worth their weight in gold. And guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've had as much fun as what I have. If you haven't already, please consider liking the show and subscribing. And don't forget to click that bell so that you get the notifications of future episodes of the program. Guys, I hope you're going to give this a whirl, and I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.